You're listening to Make It Big, a podcast about all things e-commerce, created by Big Commerce.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Make It Big podcast. I'm Megan Stabler, Senior Vice President of Marketing here at Big Commerce, where we're delivering e-commerce for a new era by focusing on the power and flexibility of our open platform to enable each business to optimize e-commerce for their specific needs. We've got a great episode in store for you today with representatives from two of our Big Commerce partners, Digital River and AmericanEagle.com, to talk about global expansion and multi-storefront. Joining me today are my good friends Pierre D'Arbost, General Manager of EMEA for AmericanEagle.com, and Ted Rogers, Chief Revenue Officer from Digital River. Thank you both for lending your time and expertise to the Make It Big podcast. Ted, would you like to share a bit more about Digital River's mission?
Yeah, so thank you very much, Megan. So Digital River is it's a company that provides merchant of record services through our global seller services capabilities that can combine payments, tax, fraud, and compliance, as well as logistics, helping brands sell goods and services all across the globe.
Thank you, Ted. And then we have AmericanEagle.com, a web design, development, and digital agency. My good friend Pierre is here with us. Pierre, would you like to elaborate on what American Eagle does for us?
Sure. Thanks, Megan. And hi, Ted. Lovely to be here. We appreciate the opportunity to participate alongside Big Commerce and Digital River. So I'm Pierre, and I've been part of the American Eagle family for several years now. American Eagle is an amazing family-owned full-service digital agency with a localized presence in the US, Europe, and the Gulf, and soon the Far East. We have about 20 offices, and we are a one-stop e-commerce shop with 25 years of delivery experience, helping clients from startup to enterprise. We build the website, help drive traffic, optimize conversion, and our brilliant account managers leverage our full service practices to help clients define and execute progressive, measurable roadmaps to achieve their business and customer experience objectives.
And that really sets the stage for why we've invited these amazing partners to talk with us today about the importance of cross-border selling. It's about potentially untapped markets for your business, the proliferation of your brand, and being a player in an increasingly competitive, expanding landscape. So let's get into it. I like to get right into the value for our audience on a topic like global expansion, right? I pose this really to both of you. Why should a retailer consider cross-border selling in the first place?
Yeah, I'll go first. Really, we're a global market, right? I mean, brands have an opportunity to continue to expand their businesses by seeking new places to find consumers. You know, they're looking outside their domestic markets. We're seeing that more and more. It's really easy to be very good at what you do in your own backyard, but it's harder once you start to look across into other regions. But you know, being a global market and with the proliferation of e-commerce, consumers really don't care that much about where a product is coming from or what where it's being delivered from. What they want is they want their goods or their services the way that they want to receive it. So and as you know, brands look at it, you know, cross-border commerce or international commerce is growing at double the rate of domestic, and so it gives brands an opportunity to improve their growth at a much faster rate than just by continuing to try to expand in their current markets.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's going to be similar, right? I think international expansion offers, brand growth opportunities. There's potentially big rewards if you mitigate the risks. Here in the UK, we've got some examples that I think you may have heard of in terms of Dyson, Boden, Boohoo, ASOS, Farfetch. They've all done an amazing job in identifying the opportunities. I think it also provides, more purpose for the products that you sell, right? Greater exposure. It can also, I think, reduce exposure to headwinds in the home market, right? By, not putting all your eggs in one basket. I think, for your team, I think there's, fabulous new experiences, opportunities, and challenges for them to relish. You've got different sort of channels to consider, direct to consumer through distributors. Do I do marketplaces? Do I do social selling? There's a great opportunity there to put your thinking cap on, put it into action, and realize the rewards.
Yeah, I mean, I love the opportunity, right? But with opportunity can be complex, right? And so part of this podcast is really to break down the steps and the thoughts that you have to have? Because I mean, the brands that you mentioned, they're big global brands, right? They probably already have the influence from a brand reputation or even the influence from a resources. But what I'd like to be able to decompose for our listeners, though, is how does a brand start off thinking about this, right? Because we're going to take our listeners through some of the consideration sets that you have to sort of say it is not as complex as you may think it is, but there is a stepwise or at least an awareness approach that you have to take through this. So, Pierre, let's go back to you with this, right? So, all right, you gave us that sort of logistics and what people need to think about and exposing your brand and fighting off headwinds and expanding your markets, doing this, right? But where and how do they start on this thing? What would you recommend to some of those brands?
So holistically, from a digital agency point of view, we'd recommend what we call a crawl, walk, and run approach. Um, I'm not going to focus too much on the crawl bit first, because I know we cover that off a bit further in today's podcast. But if I move much more to the walk part, which is very much about sort of, understanding in your home market, is it operational excellence where you compete on price for success? For international markets, it may be that operational excellence doesn't apply and that you need to focus on your service differentiators to command a higher price to make margin internationally. So there's a lot to sort of be mindful of. But in the crawl aspect of the crawl walk run, it is very much about sort of doing the research country by country, understanding culturally, what's going to get traction and what's not. When you're onto the walk side of things, it's now applying a structured approach to the growth. What is the goal for each country? Define the strategy to achieve the goal. Are you going to start with a soft launch, perhaps via sort of local marketplaces? Are you going to commit to a hard launch with a direct-to-consumer website, or leverage a local distributor, or engage a service partner like Digital River, for payments and merchant of record and so on? So there's a lot to think about. I think in terms of BigCommerce, from our perspective, we think it's an ideal home market and scalable international e-commerce platform. Our BigCommerce practice team and customers love it. I can categorically say that we've never had a client migrate away from a BigCommerce implementation. I think out of the box, it offers a comprehensive composable approach. You've got an expanding portfolio of third-party plugins and APIs to help you win. And of course, the multi-site administration suite is designed for international engagement. So, from our point of view, providing you've done your research, you've determined your strategy, you've then selected the right e-commerce platform and third-party service providers, that's the basics to kind of get things going. One thing I would say in addition to that is try and determine, for you as a business, what does good look like in terms of the country that you're intending to launch in. Create budgets with ROI measures for comparative analysis that will then help you in terms of decisions, in terms of optimizing, operationally and the customer experience moving forward.
That sounds really cool. I mean, I guess part of this is really finding what your MVP is going to be for each market segment and defining it based off of personas, audience types, the pain points you can build into it. And I'd probably throw another one in there as well. What is your competition doing or likely to do, right? Because that needs to be another balance. So, all right, we got a good sense that we need to do some research. We need to build out, what are we going after as far as audiences? And by the way, thanks for the kudos unsolicited on big comments there. I do appreciate that. But you figured out your audience. You figured out what you've got. You figured out what you need to now do and the solutions that are going to go serve them, right? But now you have to connect the dots, right? You got to think about the business goals to that user experience. So what do you do next? Pierre, I'm going to throw it right back to you because you're on that role anyway.
Okay. Well, on the basis that you've done the market research, which is looking at the product and customer experience fit, you've determined the country strategy, you've defined the business activities by country, you've determined if the user experience and user journey is adapting to achieve the desired economic performance. You've got to measure, calibrate, A/B test, check for ADA compliance, and best practice design. Again, I'm going to mention BigCommerce because it's a great fit for international markets. We love Cornerstone, the flexibility to develop a BigCommerce theme that supports your branding and design guidelines. We think, with the BigCommerce platform, the plugins, you can optimize the customer experience and customer journey to achieve the business objectives. So I think making sure you've got that technology as an enabler, you can combine it all to execute a great user experience.
And is there anything else, if you figure out what the platform is, what we should be putting in there? Well, I'm just wondering, right, what else do we need to start considering, right? If we got the platform squared away, I mean, you've thankfully, you've mentioned BigCommerce a couple of times, right? But what are the other things that you have to think about from the platform and what it's gonna deliver, at least from your merchandising strategy and other things? I mean, there's other components that you've got to start thinking about in that strategy as you're planning entry into a market, right?
And that's right. I mean, I think, going back to the crawl, walk, run analogy. Once you're up and running, I think it is definitely about leveraging the metrics. Understand what they're telling you, what audience behaviors are driving those metrics, calibrate to optimize the opportunity. I mean, from our perspective, and e-commerce is a continuous process for home and international markets. It's always on. So it's once you take off, the ultimate goal from my point of view is infinite flight. With checkpoints measuring health. Keeping you up there.
Thanks, Pierre, for that. So let's start talking about expansion itself. I want to turn to you now, Ted. How do you find your new audience? Where do you think e-commerce businesses should look in this global expansion that we're talking about?
Yeah, thank you for that, Megan. When we work with our clients, we generally start with them by trying to look at the areas that have low barriers to entry. So going global can be and sound very daunting to brands at first. It doesn't really need to be, and that can be handled through a number of different ways. So one of the examples of places that we work with our clients on is even if they have a domestic market, they have their e-commerce experience in their home market. Oftentimes we'll work with clients to look at their current traffic sources and see where are they coming from other countries, where traffic might be coming from outside their domestic market, and exploring and looking at the products that they would have on their site. This is sort of like a internet word of mouth, is one way to start. And from there, once you start with that, you can certainly look at that and do this with similar countries that have similar characteristics. So, for example, if you're in the U.S. and you can start with other English speaking countries, just to try to start that international experience, and build upon that. So, work through the challenges you might come across for your first time going international or cross border. And as you build up that experience, you can start to take on more of the other challenging countries, or more of the long tail countries. The other aspect that we work with clients on is recommending that they start with markets that are a bit more mature. It's very easy to look at really high growth rates that might be double or near triple digit e-commerce growth rates, but generally those are going to be your less mature or more of the long tail countries. So when we work with these clients, we look at them and say, start with an area that has similar experiences, that has a bit more of a mature e-commerce environment, so that you can build upon what other brands have done, what other experiences are, and more than likely that's where your competitors are at as well. So you want to make sure you're in the markets where you can build upon success.
Yeah, I mean, I like that. I'm responsible for international expansion here at Big Commerce, and I look at a lot of different metrics, including the explosion or the use of mobile devices and tablets. I look at payments and the types of payments that are going on. I look at what are the segments that are happening today, right? In APAC, it makes up 6 of the 10 fastest growing countries for retail e-commerce sales, and then we've just expanded ourselves into Latin America and have more expansion to go in as well. And 3 markets in LATAM are really cracking into the top 10 itself. So it is not just looking at the easy places to go that is just the like and the same as you do today, but it's also really looking at what's growing and what's coming. Social media, social channels, omni channels. What are the biggest things? Is it a WhatsApp or a Snap? Is it a Facebook or Instagram? What are those growth rates as well? Some of the things I look at it. So, I'm going to go back to you now, Pierre, and talk a little bit more about, we keep talking about a lot of things to consider. So it has to become taxing on a team and put some stress on probably your established processes of, I'm going to use the British word plodding along, right? We're just going to go slowly and do it. But this is a hyper competitive market, right? We talked about the necessity of looking at what your competition is doing as you look into these markets. So, what are the keys to long-term success through these growing pains? What should you be looking at as that balance between taxing your team, putting stress on established processes? How do you look at it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think operational efficiency needs to match growth to support margin. You need to figure out what generic website and fulfillment processes can be employed versus country specific. You have to be quick off the march in identifying operational issues and resolving them. I think from an e-commerce platform perspective, BigCommerce's multi-storefront helps optimize website operations on the front end and back end. So I think, again, selecting the right tech stack to support your international growth, will help you react to these challenges. And then in addition to that, ultimately you want to be growing your turnover. So I think regularly, reviewing, optimizing the customer experience for new and repeat customers, including, review of customer acquisition channels. I think that's really important, and your product mix and aligning, what are the value adds that appeal to those target customers in those specific countries. Some countries expect free shipping, others don't. So I think from an operational point of view, it is zero in operational efficiency, but be aware of the cultural differences that you need to maintain.
Yeah, and so let's keep that conversation then going around cultural concerns, right? It's always obvious to me when somebody gets it right, because I can see myself in the imagery, the personalization they're bringing forward, and we have to think when you're doing cross border. I may be selling into an Indonesian market, but I don't want to use just white person imagery or the way that I may like to have salutations. And I think, Pierre, you and I both coming from Europe, we know that with formal and informal emails and letters that go to somebody who's in Holland is different to somebody who's in France, is different to somebody who's in the UK, and is completely different to somebody who's in the US that just says, "Hi, Pierre, how you doing?" Right? You're not going to have that in an email going into the UK. So let's get into the cultural concerns, right? Because I think any aspect of business that crosses borders has to be conscious of things like cultural sensitivities, local traditions, the regional specific omni channels that I mentioned before that are in there. So this is sort of the open question for both of you, right? How do you make sure you're doing the right thing by the various locales in which you're selling into? Who wants to pick that one up first? Ted? Pierre?
Yeah, I can start, and Pierre, if you want to jump on after this. We actually, one of the things that we did last year, we conducted a study with payments.com, and it was all about cross-border friction index, right? What was the consumer experience like? What are their expectations when they're looking to purchase online? And we did it both from a local perspective, but really trying to understand the implications through the eyes of the consumer for cross border. Where the inventory is in a different country and having it shipped to the country where the consumer's at. And so it was kind of a ranking, right? Pretty straightforward based upon a whole bunch of factors. We kind of built this score, this index. And for the brands that were at the top, 75% of the top brands that we saw were using some form of IP geodetection to basically use everything that they could to understand where the consumer is at, and then localize that experience. And oftentimes from a digital rubber perspective, we talk localization, and that's usually localization of the payments, the currency, making sure you're collecting tax the right way, and assessing fraud based upon what we know about that market. But the first parts of those mean something to the consumer. The real back office things that they don't even, the fraud aspects, the consumer doesn't really care about. But what the consumer does care about is using that understanding where they're at to do what you can to get that experience in the right language. And like you talked about, the imagery, even down to the catalog, because you can't necessarily ship every product to every country. Especially when you get into this, this cross-border commerce, you have to make sure that you can sell your product there. So making sure your catalog represents the products that they can actually purchase, can be delivered to them within the bounds and the rules and regulations of international commerce, right? So that's one of the main things that we saw, which was a shift for the consumer, was really more about having that real local experience, like you talked about, Megan, where years ago it used to be about speed of transaction. Now, speed of transaction is an expectation that I'm going to be able to get the things, get through the process, get what I want, and complete that transaction quickly. That's not a laborious process. It's really about that experience, and does it match my cultural expectations?
Yeah. Pierre, what are we missing from that part of the conversation? What else do you have to consider?
Okay, so going back to and that was really helpful. So thanks for that. Going back to what I was talking about earlier about crawl, walk, run. I think that if you're going to embark on an international sort of expansion, I think start with market research, right? I mean, there are the basics that Ted covered, in terms of what's the lowest inhibitor in point in terms of entry, English speaking, so on. But yeah, I mean, no matter what home country you're operating from, your government will have an international trade office. Okay, and in the UK, for example, there's a really good government department office called the UK Trade and Industry Department, and they execute a program that helps companies export. And within that particular program, you can get access to sort of market intelligence resources and reports and so on. And then, adding to that, you've then got the independent service providers, like again, from a UK perspective, you've got Internet Retailer, and these guys produce retail X reports, by industry, by country. You can review those to identify product and service gaps, opportunities upon which to launch your brand and products. And then, one of the other things, I mean, obviously, I work for an American company, and we've been reviewing sort of an organization called AmCham, which is American Chamber of Commerce, who has a presence around the world. And those guys do have European offices in the Gulf, and they've got a lot of information and resources that you can help you sort of get the basics right in terms of how do I localize my brand and offering, to serve this country. Once you've got that information, you've got to sit down and you've got to say to yourself, okay, well, what are my cultural differences in my home market versus the country that I'm looking to launch into? And identify those differences. For example, if you're in the beverage, selling beverages online, perhaps selling a new alcoholic cocktail, to countries in the GCC isn't going to go down well. But if you happen to be in the European and American sports car parts business, it will go down very well. Megan alluded earlier that sort of looking at sort of how people engage digitally. I think certainly many countries, especially sort of in the Far East, mobile just kills desktop, and so you've got to think about how these people engaging digitally with your brand. So, in summarizing, I think, determine your country localization strategy, look at your products, look at your content, will it work? And if you think it's a go, then localize the payments, the taxing, the taxes, the shipping, the returns. Also check to see if your planned promotions and discounts will apply culturally, because again, some countries it doesn't resonate. If you apply some form of discount, it may seem that sort of actually it's a cheap product or something like that. So be wary of all of that. If you look at all those aspects, you'll connect the dots, and I'm sure you'll be able to launch successfully in a new country.
Yeah, it really does start with the payment, right? I mean, that's as far as the consumer goes. They have a couple different aspects of the payment that that in that transaction that they care about a lot. One is, can I transact in the currency that represents my country? I mean that people want to look and feel like as close to them as possible. So you want to make sure you can transact in the local currency. The other is the payment methods, right? I mean, I know Pierre brought that up, and Megan, you mentioned it as well. But I think it's amazing to me as I joined Digital River was the variety of payment methods that can be in each country, right? If you look at in the EU, there's 25 different payment methods, that we support alone. And country by country, there are very interesting nuances. Like even within that, in Europe, especially in Germany, you have direct debit, which is very popular, but not used. I mean, You don't see that in other regions, other areas. Um, and so making sure you have those right payment methods that are going to be the accepted and most widely used within the countries is important. Wallets ever growing, constantly growing, and especially in APAC, especially as you get more mobile. And you talked about that as well. More brands or more consumers are expanding and transacting from a e-commerce standpoint from their mobile devices more than ever, and that's where wallets really come into play. They already sit there, already exist there. It's just an important aspect that brands have to think about, and then understanding kind of where that future of payments is going for any country is important to keep an eye on as well. Growing use of buy now pay later, right? I want to buy this luxury good, or maybe it's not even that luxury of a good. It's just I'd rather spread the payments over 4 payments. Those are kind of aspects that can vary country by country. We do have a great resource on our website where brands can go and look at a country level and understand what the key points are by market, and what the top payment methods are by market. So folks listening to this could go to digitalriver.com and find that under resources. The other component, like I said, beyond the payments and currency, which they're just must-haves. If you don't have that experience right, you'll lower your likelihood of repeat purchase, or actually even you risk cart abandonment by not having what the consumer's looking for. But it does get deeper than that. Then it is making sure you have that you're representing the taxes appropriately, because there, even in some countries, I know there's a little bit about this that I can talk to a little bit later too, but is the e-invoicing requirements that countries have, making sure that tax is being collected correctly. And even in some countries, they put part of the onus of that back to the consumer, and they've created a lottery around the submission of your e-invoice. Puts you in a lottery so that you can win an award at the end of the year. The idea for that is, the government is getting the consumer to help them make sure that they are collecting the taxes they expect to collect, right? And so now it becomes a cultural norm for these countries. I mean, there's like 80 plus countries now, I think is what it is, that are instituting or have instituted e-invoicing requirements. So it just kind of continues through the transaction process, making sure you have all these components right to meet their cultural expectations.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on moving from just payments and costs and landing and everything else into taxes, right? Because taxes can be complex, and even more complex depending on the country that you're trying to do business with. You get into Brazil, it can be a nightmare of figuring out the taxes. So I'm glad that Digital Rivers are around and doing that. But the other thing that I think is important that we do touch on briefly is that around compliance, right? A lot of countries started off very heavily in Europe with GDPR and what the European Union was doing to protect privacy and rights. We're seeing a lot more coming out in other countries and other nations around the world. So, any guidance from either of you on how do you guide around compliance? I mean, you can't not do it. So, how do you do it in a way that you're going to be safe? I guess is the right way to do it.
Well, that's one of the things that Digital River does for its clients, right? So what you mentioned, merchant of record. We act as merchant of record, and what that means for folks is that we take on both the financial responsibility and the legal responsibility of the completion of a transaction. So our job is to shield brands from risk. I mean, that's really a cornerstone of why brands work with us, and the simplicity of it. Because taxes, as an example, tax compliance, and there's all kinds of different types of compliance, but tax compliance, I'll just continue on this for a moment. It's ever changing, constantly changing. You have more and more countries putting in digital service taxes because of the growth of e-commerce. But even where people think it's easy, well, especially if you're a U.S. based company, you think doing business in the U.S. is easy. Well, you got 50 states with different tax laws in each state, and you got some states that have different tax laws. In like Louisiana, they have 64 different tax jurisdictions, as an example, right? So those, and it changes, constantly changing across the globe. So staying ahead of that is important. But the other aspects of compliance is, can I sell my product in that country? How do I make sure that the trade compliance is set right? So that using HS codes, Digital River, working with our partners, has the technology in place to make sure that we can help brands to be able to assess that. Can I sell my product from point A to point B? Is that okay? But you have to be able to know what the product's made of. Go all the way down to the materials list in some cases to make sure that's an okay thing to do. The other component I would offer on top of that is making sure you're not inserting surprise into the transaction for an end consumer. So duties, the collection of duties from an import standpoint is an important thing as well. So, again, there's ongoing changes around tariffs and duties, et cetera, but being able to display that to the consumer in the checkout process and make sure it's clear, it's transparent. Going back to making sure you have the right customer experience, you want to make sure that you put that up front and have the ability for a consumer to pay that and understand what they're paying versus later when that product is delivered to the consumer, where the delivery person is knocking at the door and saying, hey, by the way, you owe me another whatever it might be. In some cases, it might be more than the product you paid for to start with, right? You mentioned Brazil, and I've seen cases where that's happened.
Yeah. Well, I love this, and I do appreciate merchant of record. And so for merchants that are listening to it, please engage with Digital River and others that do this. And I don't want Pierre to laugh, but I'm a diehard Leeds United fan, right? Been that fan since birth. And a couple of nights ago, I did go ahead and purchase their 2023 season top. And the confirmation email did come back with merchant of record information, which I appreciated because it gave me more confidence that that piece of good that I just ordered was going to be getting to me in Austin, Texas, with everything taken care of and no additional hidden import taxes that I would have to worry about and stuff like that. So I do appreciate the work that you all do. So, look, we've talked about a lot of stuff, right? We sort of keep moving through this. You've figured out how to sell online, what to sell online. You figured out who to sell online. You've started getting those conversions. You started getting the sales, right? But what about shipping, right? It is important that I, the consumer, know that I'm going to be getting my goods, just as you've talked about, Ted, in a proven way. There are services, for example, that I use in the UK that ship certain products, grocery products, to me within 24 hours using a carrier, one of our big commerce partners like DHL, and I'm guaranteed I'm going to get it. And I love it because I'm a chocoholic and I get my chocolate. And I'm in Texas, so it gets melted, and so it's all good. But what do we have to think about when international here starts scaling for us, right? How can merchants overcome the challenge without leaving the shoppers an unpleasant experience? So we want to delight customers. Pierre, you talked about it as customer experience. That's at the forefront of a lot of the things. We've talked about how to go ahead and make sure that we're looking at those right shoppers in the right countries. So part of the buyer journey is shipping and logistics. So what do we have to do to get it right?
Yeah. So this has come up a lot. It is about research, right? Doing your research to understand what the aspects of trade compliance are. I probably said this a few times already, but making sure you can sell the product in the country that you want to have it in. So that's just step one. Understanding the customs aspect and the commerce trade rules. Again, we were just talking about the duties and taxes for import export. But shipping rates can fluctuate, and this is where it comes down to a brand has to figure out what is the right distribution model for them. Which means you can have centralized inventory sitting in one country, and you're going to ship it out to all the different locations. You can go all the way to moving inventory into every country you want to go do business in. But the broader you get from those to the number of countries you want to support, the harder that is to maintain as a real distributed inventory. And so we see kind of a hybrid across the board of is it hub and spoke or is it a hubless model? Those kind of things that we work with clients on. But again, the journey doesn't end when a consumer gets their product, right? Especially in the e-commerce space, when you go into some of the physical goods, especially like in apparel, right? Brands, the rate of return within the apparel space is something that brands have to contend with. So you have to make sure not only can I get my product to them and in a timely fashion that meets their needs. So figuring out what the customer expectation is based upon helps you define where you need to maintain your inventory. but is being able to handle that reverse logistics process. What's going to happen when somebody wants to return it? In some cases, brands just say, keep it. It costs me more to have you return it than it does for me just to ship you another one. But if you have to consider the aspects of where is it going to return to? How am I going to process the return? How am I going to get that back? And am I going to put that product back in circulation? How am I going to handle the refund process or the return of and the recollection of taxes that may have been paid already on that? So there's all kinds of different components that brands have to think about, but it does all start with the research from the product you have and the countries you want to go into, but understanding the consumer expectations that go along with that.
Fantastic, Ted. Thank you. Hey, Pierre, look, a couple of quick questions for you, if you can do it for me, right? How do we, as a merchant listening to this that wants to do this international stuff, cut through all the complexity and arrive at a simplified strategy? What are the three things off the top of your head that you say that you would recommend for them to make this approachable?
Sure, that's a good question. Summing up, so I think you've got to identify, what is the international goal, right? And once you've established that, you've got to define your international strategy to enable it. The how, and there are three things using the crawl, walk, run analogy that I would refer to support that. So crawl would be do your country research, understand how to do business there. The walk would be choose the right tech stack, the right e-commerce platform, the right service partners like Digital River, and of course a proven agency that can implement your website. And on the run side of things, it's back to basics. I'm afraid it's execute, measure, review, fix, repeat, and that will keep you in flight.
That's fantastic. But as you know, Pierre, and I definitely know that you know, Ted, because we talk about the taxes all the time, right? E-commerce evolves consistently. It's evergreen. So how do you protect yourself, right? What can e-commerce businesses do to future-proof themselves when it comes to selling cross-border? Going to go back to you, Pierre, and then maybe back to you, Ted, for some quick summary on that.
Okay, so I think so when in flight post-launch, I think foremost you've got to be aware. Macroeconomics is just killing the world right now, isn't it? I mean, different countries around the world are suffering different rates of inflation, which will affect their buying power, right, to buy products. So I think it is all about being aware. I think you need to understand your target customers, their cross-channel digital engagement. Engage those channels, optimize, personalize, customer-first mindset. All those sorts of, sticking to the knitting. I think you've also got to keep an eye out for new influencers. I mean, Amazon are launching their Buy with Prime button. I know it's in the US only for now, but these are new innovations that that will support growth. Especially from a customer point of view, that they just want to make it easier to buy. And I think the other thing to be mindful of is social selling. I mean, you've got Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat. WhatsApp is making, is hugely influential in the Gulf. And yet I never really knew about it in terms of, how it's used in the UK. And I was speaking to colleagues in the US about how, just straightforward SMS text for coupons and an email for promo deals and so on. So I think, it is about being aware, on all aspects of what's going on in relation to your presence in a country.
Well, I think this has been hugely informative, both to me and I hope to our listeners. So I want to thank you both for joining us. Thank you, Ted. Thank you, Pierre. So, Ted, where can Make It Big listeners learn more about Digital River and your capabilities?
Yeah, your best option is digitalriver.com. It's a very informative site. And like I said earlier, it has some resources on it that can help brands and help merchants understand, how they should think about and what are some of the considerations for various countries. So we try to put some things together, but certainly has a lot of information about how we support brands and the partners that we have, like you all.
Thank you. And Pierre, I'm always thankful to listen to your intelligence and learn more from you. So with AmericanEagle.com, I probably gave it away, but where can our listeners learn more about AmericanEagle.com?
Thank you, Megan. Well, our name says it all. So I'd start with our website, sign up to our newsletter. Also, do use LinkedIn. Follow AE. We've got some great posts that share sort of insights from our offices around the world. Connect with AE colleagues, and also direct message me. We have a slogan. With AE by your side, you don't just grow, you soar.
Well, I want to thank you both because you've helped me grow and soar on today's podcast. So thank you very much for that. And for those listeners that are out there, you can check out our co-authored guide with Digital River and AmericanEagle.com called Your Commerce Brand Optimized and the 10 Steps to Global Expansion for more insights. You can find a link in the show notes of this episode. Also, Make It Big 2022 is next week. So don't miss out on your chance to register for our free annual e-commerce thought leadership conference happening on September 13th and September 14th. Visit bigcommerce.com/makeitbig. That's bigcommerce.com/makeitbig. So we do appreciate you and thank you all for listening.
Thanks for listening to the Make It Big podcast. For even more cutting-edge insights, check out our Make It Big conference, now available on demand. You'll get e-commerce tips and strategies from global thought leaders like Seth Godin and Jenny Fleiss, plus expert advice from partners like Google, TikTok, and more. Watch today on bigcommerce.com.